Keanu Reeves sat alone in his trailer long after the lights on set had gone dim. Outside, the world was quiet, the echo of laughter and chatter from the crew fading into the night. But inside, something restless moved in his chest, like a whisper that refused to be silenced. He had been working on this new film for weeks, a movie that was different from the action and thrillers he was known for. This one was about faith, hope, and a man's search for meaning. But tonight, the lines on the script felt heavier than ever. The more he read, the more he felt like he was not just playing a part. He was unearthing questions he had buried. For so long, the film's story centered around a man who meets Jesus in a vision. And tonight, after filming a scene where he was supposed to ask Jesus for forgiveness, Keanu felt something tighten in his throat. There was a question that kept pressing on his heart, something he had never asked anyone. Not his friends, not his family, not even himself when he was alone at night. It was a question so raw, so big, that he feared no one could answer it. But maybe, just maybe, someone could help him find the courage to speak it. Across the lot, Jonathan Roumie, the actor playing Jesus, was packing up to leave. Jonathan had gained fame playing Jesus in a series that touched millions. His face brought comfort to many. Some people even cried when they met him because they felt like they were seeing a glimpse of the real thing. But Jonathan always reminded people he was just a man, an actor with struggles and doubts too. He never claimed to be holy, only a vessel for a story greater than him. Tonight, Jonathan saw the light still burning in Keanu's trailer window and felt a tug in his chest. He knew the weight this movie carried for all of them. Maybe, he thought, Keanu just needed someone to listen. When Jonathan knocked gently on the door, Keanu looked up. He was surprised to see him, but motioned him in with a small wave. Jonathan sat across from him, his eyes calm, patient. For a while, they didn't speak. The silence felt like a warm blanket, soft and heavy, covering their worries for just a moment. Then Keanu spoke, his voice low and tired. "You know, Jonathan, it's strange. I've played so many characters, killers, heroes, wanderers, but I don't think I've ever felt so small as I do now. Asking questions I'm not sure I want the answers to." Jonathan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Sometimes, that's exactly where we find something real," he said. "When we feel small, when we admit we don't know." Keanu stared at the script on the table. His hands trembled slightly. He took a breath, the words catching in his chest. "Can I ask you something? And I don't want you to answer it like the character. I want you to answer it like Jonathan." Jonathan nodded slowly. "Okay, ask me." Keanu closed his eyes. For a moment, he was back in that tiny apartment he had lived in years ago, sleeping on a mattress on the floor, eating cup noodles, wondering what the point of it all was. He thought about the people he had lost, his friend River, his unborn child, his beloved partner. Pain that never really left, only settled like dust in the corners of his mind. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Why does love hurt so much? If God is love, if Jesus is love, why does it feel like love is the thing that breaks us the most? Why do we lose the people we love the hardest? Why does it feel like the more we open our hearts, the more we suffer?" Jonathan's eyes glistened with emotion. He looked down at his hands, searching for words, but there were none. No perfect line, no script to read from, no wisdom that would heal a wound so deep. All he could do was breathe and shake his head slowly. I don't know, Keanu. I don't have an answer for that." Silence filled the trailer again, but it was different this time. Not empty, more like a space where the truth could live, raw and unpolished. Keanu felt tears sting his eyes but didn't wipe them away. Jonathan placed a hand on his shoulder. "Steady, warm, maybe," Jonathan said softly. "Maybe some questions don't have answers we can hold. Maybe the asking is the answer. Maybe love hurts because it's real, because it means something, because it changes us." Keanu nodded, his chest rising and falling with a shaky breath. In that moment, something small but important shifted inside him. He realized that some wounds would never close the way he wanted. But maybe they didn't have to. Maybe the scars were reminders that he had loved deeply, fiercely, without regret. Maybe that was enough. The two men sat there, not as actors, not as characters, but as two souls trying to make sense of the shadows and the light that lived inside them. Outside the trailer, the night was still, but for Keanu, a new dawn was beginning to break, not in the sky, but somewhere deep in his heart. And he knew that tomorrow, when the cameras rolled again, he would bring this truth with him, this question with no answer, and maybe, just maybe, someone watching would feel a little less alone in their own search for why love hurts, and why it still matters. A conversation that stayed in the heart. Next morning, the sun peeked through a thin curtain in Keanu's trailer, painting soft stripes of gold on the floor. But Keanu wasn't asleep. He hadn't slept at all. Instead, he sat cross-legged on the small couch, staring at the same question scribbled over and over again in the margin of his script. Why does love hurt so much? The words looked different in the daylight, less like a wound, more like a doorway he hadn't yet dared to step through. He remembered Jonathan's face when he asked that question. The way Jonathan's eyes had gone soft and wet, not with pity, but with an understanding that spoke louder than any answer could. Maybe it was true. Maybe the asking was part of the answer. But that thought didn't make the ache in Keanu's chest any lighter. He wondered how many people around him carried the same question, hidden beneath polite smiles and busy schedules. Maybe they needed to hear someone say it out loud. When Keanu walked onto set that morning, the crew was already buzzing with cables, lights, and whispered instructions. The director, a kind woman named Claire, gave him a gentle nod. She could see he hadn't slept, but she didn't ask why. She trusted him, knew he brought his whole heart into every scene. Today they were filming one of the most important moments, the part where his character sits at a worn wooden table with Jesus, sharing a simple meal, speaking about forgiveness. But Keanu knew that under the surface his own question was still alive, beating like a second pulse. Jonathan was already in costume, sitting under a shady tree nearby, flipping through his Bible for comfort. When Keanu approached, Jonathan looked up and offered a small, knowing smile. They didn't say much. They didn't have to. There was a quiet respect between them now, built not just on lines and scenes, but on something deeper, the rawness of their conversation the night before. As the cameras rolled, the scene unfolded like a tender dance. Keanu's character, a man broken by loss and mistakes, sat across from Jesus, played by Jonathan, who looked at him with eyes full of patience. The lines were scripted, but the pauses were real, pregnant with the weight of what Keanu still carried in his heart. At one point, the director called for a break. Keanu stayed at the table, his hands tracing the rough grains of the wood. Jonathan sat down beside him, no longer in character but just as a friend. They watched as the crew adjusted the lights, their laughter echoing in the distance. But around them, an invisible bubble of stillness remained. You know, Jonathan said after a while, his voice hushed, last night, you gave me something I didn't know I needed. Keanu turned to him, eyebrows raised in gentle surprise. What did I give you? Permission, Jonathan said. Permission to admit I don't have all the answers. People come to me, thinking I have them, because I play Jesus. But I'm just Jonathan. I'm still searching, too. Keanu let out a soft chuckle, the kind that comes from understanding and exhaustion. Funny. I thought you were helping me. Maybe we helped each other. Jonathan's eyes crinkled with a smile. Maybe that's how it's supposed to work. Before the break ended, a young woman from the crew came over with a cup of coffee for Keanu. She looked shy, almost afraid to meet his eyes. Her hands trembled slightly as she handed him the cup. I overheard part of your talk yesterday, she said, her voice a whisper. I hope that's okay. I've been asking the same question. About love. My dad died last year. It broke me. I feel like I don't want to love anyone again because it hurts too much. Keanu looked at her, really looked, not like a celebrity greeting a fan, but like a man seeing another wounded soul. He reached out, placing his warm hand over hers. I'm so sorry for your loss, he said softly. It's okay to feel that, to ask that question. You don't have to have the answer today. Maybe just keep your heart open a little. Love hurts, but maybe it also heals us in ways we can't see yet. Her eyes welled up, but she smiled. Thank you, Keanu. That means more than you know. As She walked away. Jonathan glanced at him, his expression a mixture of pride and something like awe. You see, you think you don't have answers, but you carry something people need. Keanu sipped his coffee, feeling the warmth spread through him. Maybe we're all just passing the light to each other, he said, a little at a time. When they returned to filming, something had shifted. The entire crew felt it, an invisible thread pulling them together. The scene came alive in a way that no camera or script could manufacture. It was more than acting. It was truth shared in quiet moments, wounds held tenderly instead of hidden. And deep down, Keanu knew that this movie would not just be another project to tick off his list. It would be a mirror for everyone who watched it, a mirror that asked, are you brave enough to love, knowing it might break you? And maybe, just maybe, that question was bigger than any answer could ever be. Asterisk the question that spread like wildfire. Days on set blurred together like brushstrokes on an unfinished painting. Each scene they filmed was another layer of emotion, raw and unpolished. But behind every take, behind every camera angle and whispered direction, there was something else happening. Something that wasn't in the script. Keanu's question had become more than just his own burden. It had become a quiet spark, flickering from one person to the next like a secret they all shared, but never dared to speak aloud before. One afternoon, the cast and crew gathered under a giant oak tree. During lunch break, the sun filtered through the leaves, casting shifting patterns on their tired faces. Everyone sat in a loose circle, sandwiches half-eaten in their hands, voices soft but honest. Claire, the director, sat cross-legged on the grass beside Keanu. She looked at him with eyes that spoke of years spent carrying her own silent questions. I heard about your talk with Jonathan, Claire said gently, careful not to sound like she was prying. It stayed with me. I think we all have that same question, in one way or another. Why love hurts. Why we keep giving it when we know it can break us. Keanu studied his sandwich like it held the answer, then looked up at her. Does it scare you? He asked. Claire nodded. More than anything, I think about my daughter every day. What if I lose her? What if one day love rips her away from me? It terrifies me. But then I think, what's the other option? Never love her at all. Never feel joy just because I'm afraid of grief? That would be worse. Jonathan, who had joined them, spoke up next. His voice was soft, but carried a weight that made everyone lean in. Someone once told me that love and pain are threads of the same cloth. You can't pull one out without tearing the other. Maybe our hearts were never meant to stay unbroken. Keanu felt something shift deep inside. He looked around the circle. The young lighting guy who hadn't seen his mom in years. The makeup artist who wore long sleeves to hide the scars she thought nobody noticed. The old sound technician who carried his late wife's picture in his pocket every day. He realized they were all stitched together by the same fragile thing. This ache that came from loving people, losing people, and somehow loving again. What if we used this? Keanu said suddenly, his voice stronger than he expected. What if we don't just act this movie? What if we really live it? What if we make this set a safe place for everyone to talk about the questions they're afraid to ask? Claire's eyes widened, then softened with gratitude. You mean, like, group talks? Yeah, Jonathan said, nodding eagerly. After filming, no cameras, no pretending, just us, sharing our real stories. The young lighting guy spoke up, his voice cracking. Would that be okay? I've never really talked about my stuff. I thought nobody would care. Keanu leaned over and placed a hand on his shoulder. We do care. You're not alone. Nobody here is. That night, they stayed after wrap, sitting on old crates and folding chairs in the corner of the soundstage. They called it the circle. Each person took turns sharing a piece of their heart. Small moments at first, then bigger ones. Laughter, mixed with tears. Secrets spilled out like rain. No one judged, no one fixed. They just listened. They just stayed. When it was Keanu's turn, he didn't hold back. He spoke about River Phoenix, the brother he lost to the darkness that fame and pain can breed. He spoke about the baby he and his partner never got to hold, the love story that ended too soon. He spoke about nights alone in strange hotel rooms, wondering if anyone would ever really see him beyond the big screen and the headlines. And as he spoke, he realized something beautiful every time he shared his pain. Someone else in the circle sat up straighter, their eyes softer, their hands less clenched around their own hurts. That Jonathan went next, admitting how heavy it was to play Jesus, to have people pour out their confessions to him, hoping he could bless their wounds when sometimes he couldn't even heal his own. Claire shared how she nearly gave up filmmaking after her divorce, convinced that she wasn't good enough, not as an artist, not as a mother. The stories kept coming, each one like a single note in a song that was bigger than any of them. By midnight, the circle broke up slowly, hugs replacing words. They all felt it, the unspoken promise that tomorrow they would carry each other's questions, too. The soundstage lights dimmed, but something glowed inside every heart that walked out into the night. Keanu lingered by the door, watching Jonathan pack up his bag. He stepped closer, voice low but steady. "You know," Keanu said, "I think your answer was right. Maybe we don't need answers at all. Maybe all we need is each other." Jonathan looked at him, eyes glistening with unshed tears, and nodded. "Yeah, maybe that's what love really is, not perfect, not painless, but worth every broken piece." And with that, they stepped out into the darkness, carrying a question that didn't need to be solved, only shared, a question that, in its asking, made every heart feel a little less alone. Asterisk when the question reached the world weeks past. But the question never faded. If anything, it grew stronger, like a soft flame passed from one candle to the next. Words spread across the set that something special was happening when the cameras stopped rolling. People who were just there to deliver lunch or fix lights found themselves drawn to the circle. Even the grumpy old security guard who always stood by the back gate with crossed arms and a hard stare, even he asked if he could sit with them one night. No one said no. That was the rule. If you came with your heart open, you belonged. Each night after filming, they gathered in that drafty corner of the soundstage. Sometimes they laughed until their sides hurt, and other nights they wept together in a silence so thick it felt holy. But no matter what, they always left lighter than they came in, carrying someone else's story tucked beside their own. One evening, Jonathan arrived late, his eyes red from crying. He held his phone in his hand, thumb hovering over a photo. The group went quiet when he stepped into the circle. Jonathan sat down and cleared his throat, voice shaky but honest. "I just came from visiting a friend in the hospital," he said. "He's only 26. He played a Roman soldier in one of my earlier films about Jesus. Now he's lying in a bed, tubes everywhere, and he asked me something," he said. "Why does God let me suffer when I tried to do good, and I didn't have an answer?" All I could do was hold his hand. Keanu, sitting close, leaned forward and placed a hand on Jonathan's shoulder. "Maybe that's all you needed to do. Maybe the answer isn't words. Maybe it's just staying." Jonathan nodded, a tear rolling down his cheek. "That's what he said too," he said. "Thank you for staying. I don't know if it made his pain easier, but it made it less lonely." Claire, always the steady one, spoke up. "When this movie comes out, people are going to see us acting, but they'll never know this part. They'll never know how the question changed us." Keanu thought about that all night. When he went home, he sat on his balcony, staring at the city lights blinking like stars that had fallen to the earth. So many people down there, so many hearts asking the same questions in the dark. Why does love hurt? Why do we keep giving it when it breaks us? Why does it feel like the more we care, the more we bleed? He knew the film would end up on big screens, all over the world, but what about the truth behind it? The truth that had grown in the quiet corners after the cameras stopped. The next morning, Keanu showed up to set with an idea. He found Claire and Jonathan by the craft table, sipping bitter coffee and rubbing sleep from their eyes. "We should share it," Keanu said, his voice calm but certain. "Not just the movie, the real part, the circle, the questions, the stories." Claire frowned, confused. "You mean, like behind-the-scenes footage?" "No," Keanu said, shaking his head. "Real talks, recorded or written. Maybe we can ask people watching the movie to send their own stories, their own questions. We make it bigger than us." Jonathan's eyes widened as he began to see the shape of it, like a global circle. "Exactly," Keanu said. A place where no one's question is too small or too messy. Where people can say what they're afraid to say to anyone else. Claire's eyes shone with tears that slipped down her cheeks without shame. You think people will want to do that? Keanu looked at her with that gentle, unshakable calm he carried like an old coat. People want to be seen, Claire. They want to be heard. They're just waiting for someone to ask them the right question. That night, when filming wrapped, they made a short video. They set up a single camera in the circle. No script. No costumes. Just real words, real hearts. Keanu spoke first, his voice soft but steady. Hi, I'm Keanu. You know me from the movies. But tonight I'm just a man with a question I've carried for years. Why does love hurt so much? If you've ever asked that too, you're not alone. We've asked it here, together every night, and we want to ask you to join us. Send us your story, your question, your truth. We'll read them, we'll listen, and maybe, just maybe, we'll find something beautiful in the asking. Jonathan followed, then Claire, then the lighting guy, the makeup artist, the old security guard. Each one spoke their truth, faces unpolished, voices trembling but strong. When they finished, they uploaded the video to the film's website and social media. Not expecting much, maybe a few hundred people would watch it. But by dawn, thousands had. And in living rooms and bedrooms and quiet corners of the world, people started whispering their own questions into the dark, and for the first time, they felt like someone was listening. When the world answered back by the end of the week, the little video had circled the world. It was strange how something so quiet, just a few people sitting in a circle, speaking from the heart, could slip past all the noise and find its way into people's lives. Messages poured in, not from fans, but from people who felt like family the moment they shared their pain. Strangers typed out the questions they were too ashamed to ask at dinner tables, or in churches or at therapists' offices. They shared them with Keanu and Jonathan and Claire like they were old friends. Some wrote just one line. Some wrote pages. Why did my mom have to leave so soon? Why can't I love myself? Why does loving someone mean they can hurt you more than anyone else? Why do I feel alone when I'm surrounded by people? Keanu sat in his trailer late one night, scrolling through hundreds of these messages. They blurred together, but not because they were the same, because each was like a heartbeat in the dark. Raw, honest, real. He read every word slowly, like he owed it to each person who had trusted him with their ache. Jonathan knocked softly and slipped in. He held a thick stack of printed letters. People who didn't have internet had mailed their stories instead. Jonathan placed them on the table, his hands trembling. Look at this, Jonathan said, his voice hoarse. We asked one question, and now we're drowning in answers. Keanu didn't look overwhelmed. He looked calm, almost at peace. Maybe that's what we're here for, he said quietly, not to fix it, just to hold it. Jonathan sank onto the couch beside him. They read letters until the sunrise painted the trailer walls in pale gold. One letter was from a woman in a small town who had lost her husband. She wrote about how she never said goodbye, how she wished she could tell him she forgave him for all the arguments they never resolved. Another came from a teenage boy who hadn't spoken to his father in years, because of something that happened when he was 9, something he still carried like a stone in his chest. Keanu read the boy's final line out loud. Sometimes I think if love is this painful, maybe I'm not strong enough for it. Jonathan's eyes filled with tears. How do we help him? Keanu set the letter down and stared out the window. A gentle breeze rustled the script pages on the table. Maybe we don't have to tell him he's strong enough. Maybe he just needs to know he's not the only one feeling like this. Maybe that makes him stronger. They started reading some of the messages aloud in the circle after filming. The crew gathered closer, hanging onto every word. Each letter brought more people into the room, extras, drivers, the lady who cleaned the trailers, the old man who delivered sandwiches every day at noon. They came, they listened, they wept, and when they spoke, it was softer, gentler. It was like they were all tending to a garden of scars, watering it with their truth, letting it bloom in the open air. One night, Claire suggested they read some letters on camera. Not polished or rehearsed, just simple, real. So they did. They set up a camera in the circle again. This time it wasn't Keanu talking about his own question. It was Keanu reading the boy's letter about being too weak for love. It was Jonathan reading a single mother's story about holding her son when he overdosed. It was Claire reading a woman's words about growing old alone, her voice trembling but steady. When they posted those videos, the response was like a wave. Churches reached out, schools reached out, shelters and hospitals and little community centers in towns nobody had heard of before. They all asked, "Can you share our stories too? Can you help us ask the question here?" Keanu didn't have to think twice. "Of course," he said. "It's not our circle anymore. It's everyone's." Between shoots, they drove to tiny libraries and dusty gymnasiums. They sat in circles with people who had never seen a movie set in their life. They asked the same question, "Why does love hurt?" And each time, the answers were different and yet the same: fear, loss, grief, hope, forgiveness. It was like the whole world was breathing out secrets it had held too long. One evening, in a church basement that smelled of old wood and candle wax, Keanu sat next to a teenage girl who spoke so softly he had to lean in to hear her. She clutched a crumpled piece of paper, her eyes downcast. "I lost my brother last year," she whispered. "He was my best friend. My mom says I should move on, but I don't want to. I want it to still hurt, because if it doesn't hurt, I feel like he'll really be gone." Keanu didn't say anything right away. He just took her hand and squeezed it. "It's okay to let it hurt," he said. "That means the love was real. You don't have to let go all at once. Maybe you never have to let go completely." She looked up at him, tears shining on her cheeks, and nodded. In that moment, Keanu felt a strange kind of peace. Like maybe every scar he carried was exactly what brought him here, to sit in this circle, to hold someone else's story like a fragile treasure. When he got back to the trailer that night, Keanu sat alone, staring at the camera they used to film the circles. He pressed record, his voice soft, almost a whisper. "If you're watching this," he said, "I want you to know, I still don't have the answer, but I know that asking the question has made me braver. Maybe it can do the same for you. Keep loving, even when it hurts, because that's what makes us human." When the question became the answer months passed. The film was finally done. The last scene was shot on a quiet morning when the sky looked like it was about to cry, gray and soft, like a blanket pulled over the world. It felt fitting. Keanu stood alone on set, looking out over the empty chairs where the crew had sat, where they had laughed and shared secrets and cried together, under the glow of cheap string lights. The circle was gone now, at least in this place, but he knew it wasn't really gone at all. It had spread too far, too wide, carried in too many hearts to ever disappear. The premiere came and went. Crowds filled theaters. People clapped at the credits. They talked about how beautiful the story was, how good the acting was, how brave the scenes were. But behind all the polite reviews and shiny interviews, there was a second story unfolding, the one that started with a single question whispered in the dark. Jonathan and Claire stayed close by Keanu's side. They had been changed to, not by the script, but by the nights in that dusty soundstage corner, by the letters and the confessions, and the trembling voices that trusted them enough to break open. Everywhere they went for interviews, people didn't just ask about the movie. They asked about the circle. They asked, "Is it real? Can I join? Does it still exist?" Keanu always smiled when he heard that question. It made him think of that first night in his trailer, when he had finally spoken the thing he feared the most, the thing he thought would make people turn away from him. Instead, it had done the opposite. It brought them closer. The studio didn't know what to do with it at first. They liked things they could control, the box office numbers, the press, tours, the merchandise. But they couldn't contain this question. It was raw, messy, alive. So Keanu and Jonathan decided not to contain it. They set up an online circle, a place where anyone could write, record, or sit in silence if they needed to. No ads, no fame, no strings attached. Just a space to say the things you never knew you were allowed to say. The first week, 1,000 people joined, then 10,000, then millions. Some sent videos of themselves sitting alone in bedrooms, whispering questions through tears. Some sat with friends and filmed each other holding hands. Some didn't say anything at all. They just watched and nodded, finding comfort in knowing they were not alone. One night, deep in winter, Keanu got an email. It was from the teenage boy who had written that letter months ago, the one who said he thought he wasn't strong enough for love. The boy wrote that he had watched every single video, that he had joined a local circle with strangers who now felt like family, that he had called his father for the first time in years. "Thank you for asking the question," the boy wrote. "Thank you for not pretending you had the answer." Keanu sat alone at his kitchen table, the email glowing on his laptop screen. He smiled, a soft, tired smile. He thought about River, about all the people he had lost, about the way grief and love were stitched together in his chest, making him who he was, imperfect, scarred, but still here, still asking. Later that week, Keanu and Jonathan filmed one last message together. No costumes, no lights, just the two of them, sitting on a simple bench under a tree, their breath turned to mist in the cold air. "We've asked a lot of questions together," Keanu said into the camera, voice steady. "We still don't have all the answers, but maybe we were never meant to. Maybe the asking is enough. Maybe that's where hope lives, in not knowing, but loving anyway." Jonathan nodded. "So wherever you are tonight, know this: your question matters. Your pain matters. Your love matters. Keep asking. Keep loving. Even when it breaks you. Even when you don't understand. You're not alone." They left the camera running for a moment longer. No one spoke. The wind rustled the branches overhead. It felt like a blessing, like an echo that would carry those words far beyond them. And somewhere in the world, in a quiet room or a busy street or a lonely park bench, someone watched that video. Maybe they were holding a letter they hadn't dared to send. Maybe they were whispering a question they'd never spoken aloud. And maybe, just maybe, in that moment, they felt something shift inside, a soft, fragile hope that even when love hurts, it's still worth giving. That even when there are no answers, the asking brings us together. Keanu closed his laptop that night and sat in the hush of his living room. Outside, the city lights flickered like distant stars. He pressed a hand over his heart, feeling the scars, feeling the love that hurt and healed him all at once. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't need an answer. The question was enough.